When Mia Sparks creates a groundbreaking tech innovation, she believes her hard work will finally earn her the recognition she's always dreamed of. But her ruthless boss, Gavin Stokes, has other plans. After stealing her idea and claiming it as his own, Gavin skyrockets to fame and fortune while Mia is left in the shadows. Refusing to let him get away with it, Mia embarks on a daring journey to uncover Gavin's dirty secrets, expose his corruption, and reclaim her stolen dream. What begins as a fight for justice spirals into a high-stakes battle filled with betrayal, scandal, and shocking revelations. In a world where power trumps honesty, will Mia take down the man who wronged her, or will his lies destroy her first? I still remember the day I walked into Gavin's office, laptop clutched tightly in my hands, nerves bubbling under my skin like soda fizz. It was the moment I'd been building toward for months. For as long as I could remember, I'd always had a knack for spotting problems others overlooked. Logistics was my world, and inefficiencies bothered me like a splinter stuck under my skin. So, when I started working at Stokes Solutions, a mid-sized tech firm specializing in supply chain software, I saw room for improvement everywhere. But it wasn't until I hit on the idea for StreamFlow that everything truly clicked. It was a product that could automate and optimize supply chain management in a way no software on the market could. I could see it so clearly, the solution to countless headaches faced by businesses. My mind raced with visions of how it would streamline processes, save costs, and eliminate human error. After months of late nights, spreadsheets, and endless testing, I built a working prototype. This was it, my shot at proving myself. Walking into Gavin's office, though, I felt the weight of every doubt I'd buried over the past few months. Would he laugh at me? Tell me it was a waste of time? I knew Gavin's reputation, charismatic, shrewd, and utterly ruthless when it came to climbing the corporate ladder. But I'd convinced myself that he valued innovation and bold ideas. That was how he'd sold himself to the team during orientation, at least. "We're a company that rewards creativity," he'd said, pacing the room with his tailored suit and blinding white smile. As I entered his office, Gavin looked up from his desk, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. "Mia," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What's this about?" I cleared my throat, trying to steady my voice. "I've been working on something I think could be huge for the company." He raised an eyebrow but gestured for me to continue. Taking a deep breath, I opened my laptop and began my presentation. The words started spilling out of me, faster and faster as I laid out the features, benefits, and market potential of StreamFlow. For a moment, I forgot my nerves entirely. This wasn't just an idea, it was a game changer, and I could see the glimmer of interest in Gavin's eyes as I spoke. When I finished, Gavin leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. This is impressive, Mia," he said, nodding slowly. "I mean, really impressive. You've done a lot of work on this." My heart soared. He got it. He saw the potential. "I'll take it to the board," Gavin said, closing my laptop and sliding it back toward me. "Let me handle the presentation from here. Don't worry, you'll get credit for the work." I walked out of his office that day feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Finally, all the hard work was paying off. I could already picture my name in the next company-wide newsletter, "Rising Star Mia Sparks Revolutionizes Logistics." I'd worked hard for this moment, and it felt like the recognition I'd been craving was just within reach. But then, nothing happened. A week passed. Then two. I tried not to panic, telling myself that these things took time. Corporate decisions weren't made overnight, after all. But as the days stretched into weeks, the excitement gave way to anxiety. Gavin avoided my questions, brushing me off with vague promises like, "The board's still discussing it," or "These things take time, Mia." And then one morning, as I was scrolling through my inbox, I saw it, an all-company email from Gavin. The subject line stopped me cold, "Introducing StreamFlow, a vision for the future." My stomach dropped. My fingers trembled as I clicked on the email and read through the announcement. Gavin had presented my idea, as his own. Every detail, every feature I'd worked so hard to perfect, was laid out in the announcement, but there wasn't a single mention of me. Instead, Gavin had positioned himself as the genius behind the concept, the architect of this groundbreaking innovation. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest tightened, and a rush of heat spread through my body. I'd trusted him. I'd poured my heart into this project, only for Gavin to strip it away and present it as his own. I didn't think, I just acted. Storming down the hall, I pushed open the door to his office without knocking. Gavin looked up, startled, but quickly composed himself, leaning back in his chair with that same smug grin he always wore. "Mia," he said, feigning surprise. "What can I do for you?" "What the hell is this?" I demanded, slamming my phone down on his desk with the email open. He glanced at the screen, his expression annoyingly calm. "Ah, the Streamflow announcement. Exciting, isn't it?" "Don't play dumb, Gavin. That was my project. My work. You promised." He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Relax, Mia. You're an employee of Stokes Solutions. Anything you develop here belongs to the company. It's in your contract." I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling in my chest. "You can't just take credit for something you didn't even create. This isn't right." Gavin smirked, leaning forward slightly. "Let me give you some advice, Mia. This is how the corporate world works. You're talented, no doubt about it. But talent doesn't mean anything if you don't know how to play the game." I wanted to scream, to reach across the desk and wipe that smug look off his face. But I knew I was trapped. Legally, he was right. Anything I created on company time technically belonged to Stokes Solutions. And Gavin, as the CEO, had every right to claim it as his own. I left his office feeling hollow. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the prototype on my laptop. All those months of hard work, the long nights, the sacrifices I'd made, it was all for nothing. Gavin had stolen my dream, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. But as I sat there, the anger began to simmer beneath the surface. It wasn't fair. Gavin didn't deserve the success he'd stolen from me. I couldn't let him get away with it. And that's when the idea started to form. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for certain, would make Gavin pay. I didn't quit. Not right away. Part of me wanted to, desperately. It would have been easier to walk out, leave the company, and never look back. But easy wasn't going to get me justice. Gavin had stolen something that belonged to me, something I'd poured my soul into, and if I just walked away, it would mean he'd won. So, I stayed. I stayed and started planning. The thing about working under someone like Gavin is that, eventually, you see the cracks in the polished facade. He might have been charismatic, a silver-tongued CEO who could charm investors and shareholders, but I'd been around long enough to know what really went on behind the scenes. Gavin wasn't a leader, he was a leech. He didn't create anything himself, he stole ideas, cut corners, and climbed on the backs of people like me to get where he was. I knew there had to be dirt on him. People like Gavin always have something to hide. So, I started digging. Late nights in the office became my new normal. I'd stay behind after everyone left, telling coworkers I was catching up on reports or tweaking some numbers for the Streamflow project. In reality, I was sifting through files, emails, and meeting notes, looking for anything I could use. It wasn't long before I struck gold. The first thing I found was a series of suspicious transactions in the company's financial records. Payments to shell companies with vague descriptions like consulting fees and vendor support. I wasn't an accountant, but even I could tell something was off. Then, there were the emails. I stumbled across a chain between Gavin and a supplier we'd worked with years ago. The tone was casual, too casual. The supplier had overcharged us on several contracts, and Gavin had approved the inflated invoices. In exchange, they'd funneled a portion of the money back to him through one of those shell companies. It was embezzlement, plain and simple. And I had the receipts to prove it. But that wasn't all. The deeper I dug, the more skeletons I uncovered. Gavin had a habit of hiring unqualified consultants who just so happened to be his friends. These friends collected hefty paychecks for doing little to no work, all while the rest of us scrambled to meet deadlines and keep the company afloat. There were more shady deals, more questionable decisions, more evidence that Gavin wasn't just a thief, he was corrupt to his core. I compiled everything I found into a folder on a password-protected drive, labeling it innocuously as Project Notes. I didn't want to risk anyone stumbling across it before I was ready to use it. But as much as I wanted to confront Gavin immediately, I knew I couldn't rush this. If I wanted to take him down, I needed to be smart about it. The next step was building allies. Gavin's ego was one of his biggest weaknesses, and it made him careless. He thought he was untouchable, which meant he didn't bother hiding his contempt for the people around him. Over the years, he'd burned plenty of bridges, leaving a trail of disgruntled employees, former partners, and even current executives who resented him. All I had to do was find the right people and convince them to help me. My first target was Lisa, the head of marketing. Lisa had been at the company longer than Gavin, and everyone knew she hated him. She'd built the marketing department from the ground up, only to have Gavin swoop in and take credit for her successes. It wasn't hard to get her on board. All I had to do was share a few of the financial records I'd found, and Lisa was ready to grab a pitchfork. "He's been stealing from the company for years," she said, her voice low but furious. I knew it. Next, I reached out to Eric, a former executive who'd left the company under mysterious circumstances. Eric had been Gavin's right-hand man when Streamflow launched, but just a few months later, he'd resigned and disappeared. When I tracked him down and explained what I was doing, he wasn't surprised. "Gavin's a snake," he told me. "He forced me out because I wouldn't go along with his schemes. I'll help you in any way I can." One by one, I built my network. It was slow, painstaking work, but every new ally strengthened my resolve. Each time I shared a piece of evidence, I felt a little less alone, a little more certain that I wasn't crazy for fighting back. Together, we started putting together a plan, a way to expose Gavin and make sure he couldn't talk his way out of it. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing I needed to do before we could move forward. I hadn't forgotten about Streamflow. Gavin had stolen my idea, but he couldn't steal my expertise. I was still the one who understood the product inside and out, and I knew its weaknesses better than anyone. So, I started working on a new version, a better version. Streamflow 2.0. I worked on it in secret, staying up late at night in my apartment, tweaking the code and refining the interface. This time, I made sure to keep everything off company property. No using my work laptop, no saving files on company servers. I wasn't about to let Gavin steal from me again. The new version wasn't just an improvement, it was a revolution. I added features Gavin wouldn't have even thought of, enhancements that made the software faster, more intuitive, and more versatile. By the time I was finished, I knew I had something special, something that could outshine the original Streamflow in every way. But I wasn't going to launch it just yet. Timing was everything, and I needed to wait for the perfect moment. The annual shareholders meeting was fast approaching. It was the biggest event of the year for Stokes Solutions, a chance for Gavin to show off his accomplishments and dazzle the investors. He'd been hyping it up for weeks, bragging about how Streamflow's success had driven the company's profits through the roof. He didn't just think he'd won, he thought he was untouchable. He had no idea what was coming. The annual shareholders' meeting was held at the Crown Plaza downtown, in one of those extravagant ballrooms with gold trim on the walls, crystal chandeliers hanging overhead, and a stage that looked more suited for a TED Talk than a corporate presentation. Gavin had spared no expense. Of course, he hadn't, it wasn't his money. He wanted the event to scream success. It was his moment to shine, to bask in the glory of Streamflow and parade himself as the genius CEO who'd revolutionized the logistics industry. As I stood at the back of the room, blending into the crowd, I watched Gavin move through the sea of investors and board members like he owned the place. He wore his usual tailored suit and trademark smug grin, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, and sprinkling his charm like confetti. The audience adored him. They didn't see the cracks. They didn't know what I knew. The meeting kicked off with the usual presentations, quarterly reports, growth projections, and updates from the department heads. Gavin sat on stage the entire time, front and center, pretending to listen while clearly waiting for his turn. Finally, when his name was announced, he stood up to thunderous applause. It made my stomach churn. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, flashing his perfect teeth as he walked to the podium. "I want to thank you all for being here today. It's been an extraordinary year for Stokes Solutions, one of unprecedented growth and innovation. And, as many of you know, the driving force behind that success is none other than our flagship product, Streamflow." The applause swelled again, and Gavin held up a hand to quiet the crowd, as if to say, "Please, I'm just a humble genius." He launched into a long-winded speech about the development of Streamflow, his vision, his relentless pursuit of excellence, and his dedication to disrupting the status quo. I could feel the bile rising in my throat as he spewed lie after lie, erasing my contributions with every word. But I didn't move. Not yet. Behind me, Lisa, Eric, and the other allies I'd gathered were stationed strategically throughout the room, waiting for my signal. They knew the plan. Every piece of evidence I'd collected, every incriminating email and financial record, was loaded onto a flash drive in my pocket. All we needed was the right moment. And then Gavin gave it to me. "To show you just how transformative Streamflow has been," he said, his voice booming through the microphone, "we've prepared a special presentation. A behind-the-scenes look at how this incredible product came to life." He gestured to one of the tech staff, who dimmed the lights and started the presentation on the massive screen behind him. My heart raced as I watched Gavin's version of the story unfold, generic stock footage of warehouse operations, clips of Gavin in meetings pretending to brainstorm, and shots of the Streamflow interface. My work. My code. My stolen vision. I clenched my fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. It wasn't time yet. The presentation ended with the tagline, "Streamflow, powering the future," and the crowd erupted in applause. Gavin stepped back to the podium, beaming. "Now," he said, spreading his arms wide, "I'd love to open the floor for questions. If anyone has anything they'd like to ask about Streamflow or the company's future, this is your chance." I raised my hand. Gavin's eyes landed on me, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across his face: surprise. Annoyance. He quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Mia, our brilliant logistics manager," he said, his voice dripping with faux warmth. "Go ahead." I stepped forward, pulling the flash drive from my pocket as I approached the microphone stand in the center of the room. My hands were steady, my voice calm. "Actually, Gavin, I do have something I'd like to share. A contribution of my own to this conversation about Streamflow." The room fell silent. Gavin's smile faltered. "Of course," he said, though his tone was noticeably less enthusiastic. I walked to the stage, holding up the flash drive. "This is a presentation of my own," I said. "It's about the real story behind Streamflow, and some other things that I think everyone here deserves to know." There was a murmur of confusion from the audience, and Gavin's face turned red. "Mia," he said, forcing a laugh. "I don't think this is the time or place. With all due respect, I interrupted, I think this is exactly the time and place. Before he could stop me, I plugged the flash drive into the laptop connected to the projector. A few clicks later, my presentation filled the massive screen. The first slide, Streamflow, the truth. The room went dead silent as I began. Gavin Stokes didn't create Streamflow. He didn't design it, develop it, or contribute a single line of code. I did. Every feature, every piece of functionality, it came from me. And I can prove it. I clicked to the next slide, displaying early development files with timestamps showing when I'd created them. Then I showed internal emails from months before the product launch, detailing my progress and updates to Gavin. He took my work, I said, my voice steady but firm. And he presented it as his own. Gasps rippled through the audience. I glanced at Gavin, whose jaw was clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. But I wasn't done. And that's not all, I continued, clicking to the next slide. While Gavin was busy stealing credit for my work, he was also stealing from this company. The screen filled with financial records, highlighting the payments to shell companies and inflated invoices I'd uncovered. I explained the scheme in detail, walking the audience through every dirty trick Gavin had pulled to line his pockets. By the time I finished, the room was buzzing with outrage. Investors muttered angrily, board members exchanged shocked glances, and Gavin looked like he was about to explode. "This is absurd," he shouted, finally breaking his silence. "She's lying. She's just a disgruntled employee trying to tarnish my reputation." I didn't even flinch. "If you think I'm lying," I said, turning to the audience, "then I invite you to investigate for yourselves. Everything I've presented here is backed up by hard evidence. And I'm more than happy to share it with anyone who wants to see it." Lisa and Eric stood up from their seats, nodding in agreement. "She's telling the truth," Lisa said, her voice loud and clear. "I've seen the evidence myself." "She's not the only one Gavin screwed over," Eric added. "I left this company because of his corruption. This has been going on for years." More murmurs, louder now. Gavin looked around the room, his confidence crumbling as he realized he was losing control of the narrative. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted. "You can't just..." "Enough," one of the board members said, standing up. His voice was sharp, cutting through the chaos. "We'll launch an internal investigation immediately. Gavin, I suggest you step down while we sort this out." The color drained from Gavin's face. "You can't be serious." "Security," the board member said, ignoring him. "Please escort Mr. Stokes from the building." The room erupted into chaos as two security guards stepped forward and grabbed Gavin by the arms. He struggled, shouting protests, but it was no use. The audience watched in stunned silence as he was dragged out of the ballroom, his carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. As the doors closed behind him, I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The board member who'd spoken earlier turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Mia," he said, "you've done this company a great service today. We owe you a debt of gratitude." I nodded, but I wasn't done yet. "I'm resigning," I said. "Effective immediately." The room erupted into whispers, but I didn't care. I'd done what I came here to do. It was time to move on. I thought walking out of that ballroom was the end of it. After Gavin was escorted out and I handed over the evidence, I figured the board would handle the fallout, and I could finally move on. I'd done my part, exposed the truth, and reclaimed my dignity. I'd even started laying the groundwork for my new company, one that would launch Streamflow 2.0 and completely eclipse anything Gavin or Stokes Solutions could do. But life, as it turns out, wasn't done with me. It started a few weeks after the shareholders' meeting. I was at a coffee shop downtown, poring over my business plan, when my phone buzzed. It was Lisa. I hadn't heard from her since the meeting, so I figured she was calling to catch up. I picked up, smiling. Lisa, hey. Her voice was sharp, panicked. Mia, turn on the news. Right now. What? Why? Just do it. You're not going to believe this. I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the live news feed. The moment the video loaded, my stomach sank. There, on the screen, was Gavin. But he wasn't in a courtroom or a police station, where I'd assumed he'd end up. No, he was standing in front of a podium, flanked by his lawyer and a swarm of reporters. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, "Fired CEO Gavin Stokes alleges theft of intellectual property." My heart stopped. Let me make one thing very clear, Gavin was saying, his voice measured, but with that unmistakable smugness still intact. The allegations against me are completely false. What we're dealing with here is a coordinated effort to destroy my reputation. And worse, to steal intellectual property that rightfully belongs to Stokes Solutions. He paused, looking straight into the camera with the sincerity of a practiced liar. The person behind this attack is none other than Mia Sparks, a former employee who fabricated evidence and conspired with others to sabotage this company. What's more, she's now attempting to profit off a product that she didn't create. I felt the coffee shop spin around me. My vision tunneled, my ears buzzing with the weight of his words. I could barely hear Lisa over the phone. He's claiming you stole StreamFlow, she said. And he's suing you for breach of contract and intellectual property theft. I hung up and stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. Gavin wasn't just fighting back, he was flipping the entire narrative. Somehow, he'd gotten ahead of the investigation and painted himself as the victim. Worse, he'd weaponized my resignation to make it look like I had something to hide. He'd turned the board against me. The company released a statement that day, distancing themselves from me and pledging to cooperate fully with Mr. Stokes to protect the integrity of our intellectual property. My allies, Lisa, Eric, even some of the employees who'd stood by me, went silent. Nobody wanted to risk being associated with me now that Gavin was on the offensive. I spent the next few weeks in a haze of panic and frustration. Gavin's lawsuit demanded millions in damages, claiming I'd stolen proprietary technology by developing StreamFlow 2.0. My savings, what little I had after leaving the company, wouldn't even cover a fraction of it. Worse, his media campaign was relentless. Every headline painted me as a disgruntled employee who tried to steal the crown jewel of Stokes Solutions. It didn't matter that the evidence against Gavin was solid. It didn't matter that I had the truth on my side. He had money, connections, and lawyers who knew how to manipulate the system. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I discovered the final knife he'd plunged into my back. I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling through the news, when I saw the announcement. Stokes Solutions was launching StreamFlow 2.0. I stared at the headline, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't possible. I hadn't shared the updated version with anyone, nobody. But when I opened the article and read the details, I realized the horrifying truth. They'd stolen it. My code, my features, my improvements. Every single enhancement I'd worked on in secret was being repackaged and sold under Gavin's name. He'd gotten to it somehow. Maybe the company had accessed my old work laptop before I left. Maybe they'd hacked into my personal files. It didn't matter how they'd done it, what mattered was that they'd stolen it. Again. I wanted to scream. Cry. Throw something. But then, something inside me shifted. The panic, the anger, the helplessness, all of it hardened into something sharper. I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. If Gavin wanted a war, I'd give him one. The first thing I did was call a friend from college, a cybersecurity expert named Theo. I told him everything, from Gavin stealing the original StreamFlow to the new version being launched under false pretenses. I need proof, I said. Something that shows how they got access to my files. Can you help me? Theo didn't hesitate. Send me everything you've got. I'll dig into it. While Theo worked, I turned my attention to the media. If Gavin wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty too. I started reaching out to journalists, independent ones, the kind who lived for stories about corporate greed and corruption. At first, most of them brushed me off, unwilling to go against someone as powerful as Gavin. But eventually, I found one who listened. Her name was Elena, and she specialized in investigative reporting. Over the next week, I handed over everything, my original StreamFlow files, the timestamps, the emails, and even the financial records I'd uncovered about Gavin's embezzlement. This is huge, Elena said. If we can verify all of this, it'll blow his whole operation wide open. But it wasn't until Theo called me back that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I found something, he said, his voice grim. They hacked your personal cloud storage. My stomach dropped. What? It wasn't Stokes Solutions, Theo continued. It was Gavin himself. He used a private contractor to access your files and download StreamFlow 2.0. I traced the IP address back to his home office. It was perfect. Almost poetic. The man who'd built his empire on lies and theft had finally overreached. The story broke a week later. Elena published a full exposé, complete with all the evidence of Gavin's corruption, the embezzlement, the hacking, and the theft of StreamFlow 2.0. She didn't pull any punches, framing Gavin as the poster child for corporate greed. Within hours, the story went viral. The fallout was immediate. The board at Stokes Solutions reopened their investigation, this time with independent auditors. Gavin's lawsuit against me was dropped faster than it had been filed. And Gavin himself? He disappeared from the public eye, but not before the FBI launched a probe into his finances and the hacking. He was facing prison time. But the most satisfying moment came a month later, when Stokes Solutions issued a public apology and announced they were transferring all rights to StreamFlow, Original and 2.0, to me. It's the least we can do, the statement read. Mia Sparks was the true innovator behind StreamFlow, and we deeply regret the events that led to this situation. I didn't even care about their fake regret. What mattered was that I'd won. Today, StreamFlow 2.0 is the centerpiece of my own company, a business I built from the ground up. It's thriving, far beyond anything Gavin could have imagined. As for him, the last I heard, he was in the middle of a lengthy trial, his assets frozen and his reputation in tatters. Sometimes, justice takes time. But when it comes, it's sweeter than revenge could ever be.